Welcome to the Big Apple Film Festival Distribution Summit. I'm honored to have RJ Millard, who's the president of Obscured Picture. RJ, can you tell us a little bit about what Obscured Picture does and what your role is within it?
Sure. So just to chime in, it's RJ Millard, just so we get off on the.
I'm so sorry, Millard, not Millard. My apologies, sir.
No problem. We are a New York mostly based company that specializes in marketing, publicity, sales, and awards. So we do a combination of short films, animation, features, docs, etc., and work in the sort of festival space of launching films both internationally and globally or locally. And we try and help filmmakers basically take their film from post-production through their distribution channels, whatever version of that ends up being, and look at all the extra options and explore best case scenario for every film that comes our way that we can take on. Some of them just not a good fit, and we always try and find other homes for them, but that's kind of where we are.
Okay. Is there a budget range or a style or genre? Is there something you guys look for in particular, or how do you look to films to acquire them for this?
No, I mean, look, we do all kinds of movies. It just has to be something that somebody on the team gravitates towards and enjoys, so that we can actually fight for it, because it's hard to sort of pitch for something that you're not really that vested in. So we always look for films that somebody on the team is interested in, but that is a pretty broad range. We've done everything from Coming to America 2 to a small film about mushroom hunters in northern Oregon. So it's a wild range.
Was that the Nick Cage film?
No, the Mushroom Hunters in Oregon is a documentary called The Last Season, which was made by Sarah Dosa, who now has Fire of Love out in theaters. And it was beautiful. I loved it, but it was a very niche story that found a home for itself, but not exactly wide marketing. So that's kind of what we try and do.
So we've got a lot of people that have made films, that are producers, that have done documentaries, that are, attendees to this. Okay. And so let's just run through a hypothetical process. They would submit a film to you online through your website. How do they first of all do that? Or do you go out and seek films?
Both. I mean, a lot of times I would say probably about 2/3 of our business is film distributors. So we do a lot of work with Amazon and Netflix and Bleecker Street and Focus and all the others. And then the other third is individual filmmakers and or film festivals. So we represent a couple of film festivals throughout the year. Doc NYC. In the past, we represent Provincetown Film Festival, Dance on Camera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the rest are the filmmakers coming to us trying to figure out where to go from here. So that sort of end step, once you get into post-production, and how do you get it out into the world? And sometimes that includes us going directly to film festivals and trying to market and get the film in there and solicit premiere dates. And sometimes it includes basically putting you together with a sales agent and going directly to buyers, or sometimes we take on the sales agent role ourselves. So it's a really mix. We do take films from random spots here and there. I always encourage filmmakers to sort of hit us up when it's not a crazy time or week. So obviously don't reach out to during Sundance or the week leading up to the Oscars or that kind of stuff.
Right.
But my email is right on the website. So you're welcome to just hit me up, and then I usually take a first stab at almost every title, just so I know what we're looking at, and then try and match it up with a team member that might be interested in the subject or the filmmaking style or whatever else. Okay.
And how does the fee structure work? Is it a flat fee? Is it a percentage fee? How do you guys deal with that scenario? Because a lot of these films, are done on lower budgets.
Yeah, I mean, look, fees are very different. I mean, if we're doing festival submissions and trying to get you in, it's going to be like $2,500 if you're submitting to 5 to 10 festivals, and that includes us following up and doing phone calls with programmers, et cetera. But if we're doing a month-long campaign or a 2-month campaign leading into release, it's going to be more in line of somewhere between, on the low end, $10,000, on the high end, $25,000. But that all depends on how many sort of markets we're taking on in terms of if we're just doing straight publicity. If we're doing sales, that's a whole different fee structure. So every film and every title is different in terms of what they need. And so we tailor our fee structure to accommodate. And sometimes, look, I mean, I get it. We're all on a budget, especially these days. And so we're trying to find ways to help filmmakers more so than take people's money, because I don't have any interest in doing that. That's why sometimes the film is just not right for us, and I'd rather you get in the hands of somebody who feels like they can really do the job that we may or may not be able to take on. And sometimes that's a workload as well. Like, we are not taking on any clients until the end of until next year, and so, you know, unless it's a Sundance movie or a Berlin movie, we're kind of tapped out for 2022.
Right. No, I think it's an incredibly needed business, because you know, filmmakers are taught how to make films. That's all I teach you in film school.
Yep.
Like, here's your movie on a hard drive, good luck. And like, after that, it's just this kind of, I mean, even right now, it's like the wild, wild west, you know, with AVOD and all these different, you know, markets, and, you know, this person's offering that deal and that person's offering this deal, and you don't even know how to educate yourself on making that. Can you tell me about the, you know, specificity of the guidance that you give a filmmaker, you know, once a film comes out? You work as a sales agent as well?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So how would that process work? Hypothetically, if you take a film on, you know, let's say, you know, a couple $100,000 film with no stars, but you like it for some particular reason, you know, what is the strategy? How do you, you know, what are the steps along the way that you guys work through?
Well, one of the main things we always like to talk about are goals. I mean, some filmmakers are really adamant. They want theatrical, so at whatever cost. Some filmmakers do not care. They want to get onto a platform as quickly as possible and start making money. So we kind of have to look at ways of getting to that goal. And there may be 4 or 5 different case studies that we can do for each title. And so part of what we're excited about, or what for me is exciting, is that there are constantly new things happening in the industry, and there are new ways to distribute or play with film and find an audience. And the ones that are the most straightforward, the easiest ones to sort of work on, are the ones that have a definable audience. So if you have a animated genre film, that's great, because we can go to animation press, we can go to genre press, we can go to those festivals that cover those types of movies, and that's a direct line. If you have a social action documentary, that's a very good line to go to, especially if it has either a known sort of like philanthropist behind it, like I'm just coming out, like the Ford Foundation or Abigail Disney's company or whatever else. The ones that are sort of the most challenging these days are independent dramas without cast. So it's just a hard place to go unless you have a subject matter that people kind of get to and kind of understand. That's our best bet to get to, is to try and go on the theme or the sort of style. Because if you don't have a cast to sell the film off of, if you don't have festivals to sell the film off of, and if you don't have a genre specific, and I mean specifically, like, is it historical? Is it LGBT? Is it got a diverse cast with American actors and characters? Those kinds of things give us additional press outlets to go to, and even festivals to go to, because there's specificity. So I always joke that, like, whenever a filmmaker comes to me and I say, well, who's the film for? Who did you make the film for? And they say, I made it for everybody. I'm like, unfortunately, if you market it that way, then nobody's going to see it.
Right.
You have to find your audience, and that has to be specific, because nobody has enough money, except for like the big distributors, to market to everyone, because it's just too expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to find the 3 or 4 hooks that are really smart and go after that as an audience from the get-go. And so once we can see the film, we can kind of like drill down and figure out what that's going to be and who.
Okay. Are you a company that gets involved with films before they're completed, like earlier in the development stages, or do you prefer to wait until the finished product is done?
I have done it in the past, and it's arduous. And as those of you who are filmmakers on the panel know, it's a hellish process that takes forever, and all it does is bleed your money and make you like lose your hair. I've already gone gray in the beard, so I prefer to just keep it to post-production. Unless there's a handful of filmmakers that I've helped out over the years, like find money and get to the right place and whatever else. But it's usually a second or third film that I'm working with them on, because I also know which distributors like their work, and I know where money can be found for their particular kind of filmmaking. So it's not something I do with new filmmakers, new clients.
Okay. It's something you do where you have an established relationship with somebody and you're comfortable with that scenario.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there different guidelines for you guys in doing documentary versus narrative? Or is it the same idea?
It's the same ideas. The market's a little bit different, and the way that we attack them are a little bit differently because you've got a number of different nonprofits that you can work with on the documentary side. You obviously want to pull in, some kind of a social action campaign into that as well. Whereas with narratives, you're working with mostly a lot of film festivals, sometimes with film groups or organizations. So if, for example, it was made by a female filmmaker, you want to work with women in film and have them help promote your movie and that kind of thing. You also want to work with, if it's got some kind of a veteran tie-in, you'll want to work with the USO if you can. You'll want to try working with IAVA and a couple of other organizations like that that are specific to those communities. But the reality is you're getting down to these niches, to this audience, to these sort of like hooks that you can find, whether it's a documentary or an animated film, or whether it's even a short. You always need to go find the first, I guess it's a bad term. Well, it's not a bad term, it's fine, but the low-hanging fruit is where you want to go to start. And then you grow your audience from there. Because if you don't get that first audience to commit and support and talk about the movie, then there's no way you're getting outside of that box. So you might as well start in it and then go.
Okay. There are a lot of opportunities now in AVOD, which didn't really exist that many years ago. Can you give us an idea on what the potential is for independent filmmakers to work with AVOD? And is that something you recommend for your films that you work on?
So most of ours, they come to us, as I said, we have 2/3 our films with distribution. And so we're in that space. That's not something that we really deal with. If it's an independent filmmaker that wants to kind of self-distribute to some degree, and we're working with a short filmmaker now that's doing exactly that. We'll launch the film in project in January. Most want to either be on YouTube or on Vimeo. They're the two sort of best sort of main platforms that you can go onto with any kind of title. You don't really have to have a lot of sort of industry knowledge. Going from there, you basically need to go figure out how to then market whatever platform you're on. So if you're on YouTube, then great. Like, let's get that out to a couple listservs. Let's get that out to a couple, organizations and groups. And you're basically just trying to drive information up. If you're trying to do it from a sales point of view, you'll need to go with an aggregator, most likely, if you want to be on a bigger platform. So that can be like a Gravitas or Giant, or, even Magnolia and now Decal have kind of come into the market, and they're doing direct to platform releases. But if you can get in with somebody like that, they can take care of all the sort of internal encoding. They can take care of all the platform, all the specs that you'll need for the hero image and all that kind of stuff, because that takes time and money and effort. So you never know what you don't know until you get into it. And then you're like, oh shit, I don't know a lot. And so if you can get in with somebody who services a lot of titles to a platform, that's probably your best bet. And then just work out as the best possible split with them that you can get, so that you're getting the most money for every dollar, and every amount of effort that you're putting into it comes back to you.
Does your company also work with television series?
We do. A couple of years ago, I mean, as everybody has been, a lot of our filmmakers just started migrating to TV because there were great opportunities, and the chance to tell longer stories was really enticing. So we do a lot of a lot of nonfiction series, more so than we do fiction series, because most of the fiction series are up on a big network. So you're talking about like one of the big three, or you're talking about Netflix or Amazon, and they have in-house publicists and they hire people and all that stuff. But we just did a series called The Deep End for Freeform, which was about an alleged cult leader in Utah. And that was a project that the filmmakers came to us a little bit late. We always like to start at least 2 to 3 months before a project has a release date. And that way we can kind of set everything up, get the materials out there, get people sort of jazzed about it, and then start doing press leading into the launch. With this one, we started probably about a month before it maybe launched, if I remember the dates correctly. And so we were playing catch up a lot, but we found specific writers who were really interested in this sort of true crime element of it, I guess is what you would call it, the cult element of it. And there are many series on various cults over over various platforms. So we jumped on board and just had a great time with the filmmakers. They were super smart. It was also a project that the person, the leader, lives in Utah and I'm from Utah. So that was a good connection for me because I could call some of my Utah press friends and be like, hey, have you heard of this woman? They're like, oh yeah, you should definitely get involved in this one because it's fascinating. So again, I always look for some kind of a personal connection that makes me excited, even more excited about the project than even just the project. So if it's a nonfiction series, I'm into it. If there's a storyline that I can follow, you bet. But I think narrative series, at least from my experience, they've always had like a bigger house to play in, like an HBO or wherever else. And so they have internal teams that take care of that. But the doc series, because we've done Emmy campaigns for HBO and done a number of short series that we've launched with the filmmakers. And those are always fun because as long as you have, again, I know it's going to sound repetitive over this next however many 44 minutes, but we always have to find that niche because that is so important to getting press. Because if you don't have press, you can't get an audience. If you don't have an audience, you're not going to get views. If you don't get views, you're not going to make money. And the reality is that's kind of the name of the game. And so finding that sort of target is so valuable early on.
So do genre films do better in terms of this kind of distribution?
Yeah, genre films are great because you've got so many outlets that cover sort of horror and thriller films or projects, because at this point in time, it's everything. And that audience is always looking for new content. And that audience kind of loves being able to say to their friends, oh, did you see this new film? And then have their friends say no, and then they can tell them all about it. That's kind of that world, right? And so if we can't get into a film festival with a genre film, just get up on a platform and let's go. And there's a couple distributors who love doing genre stuff and they're very good at promoting it because they know exactly how to get to that audience quickly and cheaply.
Got a question for you. Is there a place to find a list of broader and niche audience groups? I have a filmmaker who wants to make a comedy for people who watch A24 films. How would you describe that audience or subgroups within that audience?
Just want to make sure I understand the question correctly. So is there a way to find niche groups? Not really. I mean, you can look up organizations, but if it's genre, it's going to be a combination of festivals and press. There aren't really, yes, online, if you go to Reddit or whatever else, like there will be groups who are talking about genre films or anything like that, but it's more so going to be media outlets. And so all you have to do is look up, horror film press sites, and you'll get a list of Bloody Disgusting and all those guys. And then it's about finding them or chasing them down, or working with somebody like myself or another team, and we know them already. So we just kind of like reach out to our friends and be like, hey, we've got this new horror film. We've done over the last 3 years at this point, the Blumhouse horror film series that Amazon does. And they're always good fun, and they love to engage. And so I have 2 team members who are really into horror movies, and so we're always game to jump on one. But in terms of a comedy, it's a little more broad because there are sites like Funny or Die and Cartoon, or not Cartoon Brew, excuse me. I'm just blanking on the other big one. But those Funny or Die is producing their own stuff. So you can't really get your stuff onto that page. So you have to find people who are, or organizations that are more interested in comedy. And that's pretty vague, because if they're promoting comedy, they're probably promoting something of their own. So it's going to be a comedy troupe, or it's going to be a comedy series that's already got its own audience. If it's animation, that's again a totally different story. If it's a cartoon saloon or a cartoon brew place, great, we can go to them. But if it's a narrative comedy, you're going after an audience that is sort of, that's much more nebulous. You're going after predominantly like 18 to 45-year-old male skewing, but in certain markets, you want to go to the sort of quote weird markets, the ones who all of course claim that they're weird, like Austin and Portland and Madison and a couple of others here and there. But everybody sort of thinks that there's an A24 model, but it's funny because if I asked you, like, here are 10 titles, which ones are A24, you'd probably get a number of them wrong because they're still from distributors like Bleecker Street, or Sony Classics occasionally releases an A24 style movie, or Neon obviously is in that similar zone, or Magnolia. It's just the one that kind of like that name stuck for a lot of people. And so I think more so you want to find the sort of nuance and the neatness and the uniqueness in your film, and then find a way to get to the people who might watch it.
Okay.
And sometimes, especially with that age demographic, it's going to be on the VOD channels, not on in theaters, because the 18 to 34-year-old demographic is not going to a movie theater. They just aren't. That's the sad reality these days.
Okay. What would you recommend to filmmakers? Because when they're making their movies, they're mostly focused on making their movies. They're not thinking of, stuff beyond there. What are some mistakes that you've seen filmmakers that you wish they would have taken care of to make the marketing aspect of the film a lot more easier?
Well, a couple things. I mean, one, certainly if it's involving a real life person, whether it's a documentary or a fiction, make sure that those people have seen it. They don't need to get final approval or cut, but you need to make sure that they've seen it before we kind of start going out, because there have been a couple times where we've been caught with the subjects or an inspired by person who comes out and lashes into the filmmakers after the film is premiered because they weren't included in the process. Make sure that all of your contracts, your E&O insurance and all that stuff is up to date before we even start getting into festivals, because you don't want to get into a situation where you get in and then you can't actually play something because you don't have the music license or you don't have whatever else. Again, a lot of that stuff can be worked out, but you need to know what you're up against. The other one that I would say that is really huge is to make sure that you're not releasing a lot about your project before you actually launch. So there are times when I've had filmmakers come to me and they'll say, I've got this great film and we're submitting to these festivals, et cetera, and can you help? And I go do my own research, which isn't much. And I find that they've got a 20-minute short of the film already up on Vimeo, or they've got like clips on their website, or they've released like all these images of the film on social. And that kills any opportunity for us to sort of promote, because look, there's so much content out there now. If we don't have something that is unique and special, we cannot get anybody to pay attention to it. We've got a documentary about a big public figure who has a nationally syndicated talk show right now. And we have had trouble finding a trailer debut with that film because the media outlets have been decimated over the last 3 years. There's such little advertising that there are so few film critics left to be actually working with. All the sort of smaller regional publications have lopped off their critic and are basically taking wire reviews. And yet the wire reviews have reduced staff as well. So you've got 3 people writing for the Associated Press on entertainment. If we're trying to do something with AP in the same window that there's a film festival happening or it's award season, we're screwed, because there's just not a window for somebody to cover it when they have 10 other stories they're already working on. And so if we see that the film's been sort of overexposed already, then sometimes we'll just pass, because we know that there's not anything for us to do with it, because the materials are out there, the trailer's up, there's already a long, sort of cut of it somewhere. And so what's exclusive, what's new that we can talk about? And that's the name of the game with media, is they want something new. And I know for a fact that film festival programmers go out and look and see what kind of social exposure or presence there are for films before they actually say yes, because they've also been burned in the past of knowing that, oh, well, they've already sort of shared all this great stuff on social, or they've already done 4 or 5 excerpts or all this. And they're like, why would we show it? Because you can get the content for free.
Right.
And that's honestly one of the biggest challenges right now, is that getting people to pay for content when they feel like they're already paying for it somewhere else is an uphill battle every day for us. I mean, TikTok has basically made us all zombies, and you can stay home and kill 14 hours watching 2-minute videos for weeks on end. Why would you bother to get your ass out, go out into the cold, wander to a movie theater, and sit there with potentially a person chomping popcorn the whole time or spilling a drink on the floor? It's a tough metric to get people to do. And now that we're all sort of so trained on watching everything at home over the last 2.5 years, getting them to come back out and getting out of that habit and back into the habit of enjoying going to the movies has been a real struggle.
Yeah. For independent filmmakers, the dream used to be theatrical, and then it used to be Netflix, but that doesn't seem to be happening anymore. what are the outlets for independent films that are made, sub-million, no stars? What's the best bet for them to plan for, and how should they?
Honestly, and this is where, the reality check comes in. It's becoming more and more difficult to even get into film festivals. That used to be like, okay, here's your stopgap. Here's how you do a theatrical run. You book a bunch of film festivals, and that's kind of your quote theatrical. And that's your way to engage with audiences, is in person, as you go to a bunch of film festivals. Every single one of them is struggling. Sundance is going to be down again this year. Toronto numbers were down in terms of the number of films they took. The number of press that were attending is down. The number of reviews that were made or written about films that were at Toronto this year were down. So it's becoming so much of a grind to get into these avenues, and then to try and jump from there to getting media coverage for it. It really creates a bottleneck of content. So for me, again, and for some of you, it may be too late, but before you start shooting, think about the concept, think about the themes, think about the audience, think about what sort of niche markets that we can get to with your movies, so that we can start moving towards an actual exposure that is really on a bigger scale than just kind of like fighting the festival fight. Because I know of 10 films that I can think of right now that are out to 20 film festivals and have not made it in to anything over the last 6 months, because all these events are basically having to scale back because of budget and attendance. I mean, even, Tribeca, Toronto, like none of them were at full capacity, both in terms of the number of films they were taking, but then also the people who were in the audiences. I mean, sure, for the big films. I mean, Toronto, I saw a screening of Glass Onion. Of course, that was packed, no problem. Fableman's packed, no problem. But that is one title out of 140 or however many were in there. And the other ones were, you could walk into a screening room at the last minute and buy a ticket. And that didn't used to be the case.
Yeah. I remember standing in line at 4 a.m. at Sundance to get whatever was left. You know what I mean? Because it's so hard to get into anything.
Yep.
What are the festivals that filmmakers should target? Because again, primarily we're talking with independent producers here. Are there still the same few, or is there kind of a broader view? Because it seems like there's a film festival, 50 of them going on every weekend around the country nowadays. Does obviously Sundance and Tribeca, Toronto have a little more cachet, but can you parlay smaller film festival wins into something?
Oh yeah, and a lot of times I tell filmmakers, actually go for something that you feel like that you can stand out in, as opposed to going for the big fish. I mean, you should submit and you should work with somebody to try and get in, clearly, but I think you also have to hit the smaller ones that can, potentially get you a festival prize, which will help you market your movie, potentially get you, if there's a filmmaker award, definitely go for those, because I mean, who knows, you might win $5,000. I mean, everything counts. Sort of in the new year, obviously it's like, in addition to Sundance, you've got Sundance, you've got Palm Springs, you've got Berlin happening, you've got Athena, which is a New York-based women's film festival, and then you sort of start all the regional festivals. So you've got Santa Barbara, you've got Cleveland, you've got South by, you've got Boston, you've got San Francisco, Atlanta. I mean, there's tons of them. Film Freeway's got a really good list of them, but I would look at the ones that make sense for your film. Don't spend all day and all of your money submitting to every film festival. Look and see which ones, again, have the awards, have something that might tie in with the themes of your movie. So if they have a writing prize or a screenwriter's prize, like Austin Film Festival in November has a great writing program, like go for those ones. If you shot in a particular state, go for that festival. It's going to get harder. It's not going to get easier. So you need to find these sort of like little pockets where you can slip into with your movie. And then that's going to sort of start develop your audience for you. And it may tell you more about your audience than you know from those first screenings.
It seems, as I mentioned earlier, with AVOD and different technologies, it's a little easier to get your film out there, but not necessarily easier to get it seen and monetized. What is your perception on all the changes in technologies, and what do you foresee coming up next?
I mean, yeah, technology is great because it makes things sort of more accessible and a little bit more utilitarian, a little bit more democratic. the challenge is, you know, once you put it up there, what next? Because
Right.
nobody's going to find it if you don't talk about it. And
Right.
so you need to monetize, you need to figure out a way to sort of publicize the film and promote it. And that is by going to, you know, that's why festivals are helpful. That's why media is helpful. That's why nonprofits or affinity groups are helpful for your film. And those are all the tools that we use on a daily basis to try and figure out, like, oh my God, you know, we have a film at screening at Doc NYC tonight that when they called us after ticket sales went on, we had 1 ticket sold. So we mobilized, put together a good group of allies, and you know, at this point in time, we'll see how many people show up, but at least know that I'm going to have 30 people in the room, and that's more than I can say on a lot of smaller film festivals.
Yeah.
So don't think that, you know, it's a field of dreams in the sense that you can create whatever you want that makes you happy, but you do need to also spend the time and effort to build it and do the work. And that is on the filmmaker to start, and then start building out your network of advocates. And whether that's a publicist, whether that's a sales agent, whether that's working with a social media company to go after influencers, to chase people to kind of see the film and talk about it there. All those are options, but it's nothing is simple and nothing is straightforward. I always caution filmmakers, like, making the film is really, it's a third of the work. And then unfortunately, then you have to find the distributor, which is, or platform. That's the second part of the work. And then the third part of the work is trying to find and drive an audience to actually go and watch it.
Oh, absolutely. It's I've mentioned in a couple of other panels we've had that they don't teach you any of that stuff in film school. You get taught kind of, you know, like I said, how to put it on a hard drive. And then at that point, you're kind of lost, and technology is moving so fast. I was just at AFM. Do you guys attend AFM, the American Film Market?
We don't. I mean, it's so much genre fair that we kind of stay out of that. And I know that the buyers are doing meetings all day, whereas I find it's much more effective to work with them off market season. So,
okay. Yeah, that's what I was kind of blown away by. It was all genre fair pretty much. It felt like 90% of it was, we want your horror movie, we want your Christmas movie, you know, we want something like that. And one distributor told me that, you know, audiences for horror movies and Christmas movies are very similar now. They're just obsessed and they will watch everything. Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, 100%.
So, yeah, what kind of advice would you give filmmakers once they have a film? Because a lot of us find ourselves in that situation. We're not taught to do that. Can we submit on your website just straight to you, or is there a submission process? How do we move forward there?
Yeah, there is on my website, there's a link at the top which has my email address. I'm not in the office a lot these days because obviously nobody is, and so I'm also on the road usually 2 weeks out of the month anyway. So it's best to just email me, and that way I can kind of get back to you when I'm a little more clear-headed, as opposed to if I'm in the middle of an event or a press day or at a festival. And I'll just sort of tell you, like, look, this is something that we can take a look at. I'll give you sort of a baseline of when to expect that I can actually watch it, because I always have a stack of movies that I'm supposed to be watching. And I also know if there's something that I just see immediately, like if you have a teaser or a trailer, I'm happy to watch that, like, and give you an immediate response. But if it's something a little bit more long and intense, then it may take me a couple of weeks to get back. And, you know, we get back to everybody. Sometimes I forget to email. So if you check in with me and be like, did you watch this? I'll be like, oh shit, sorry, I never actually wrote you back, but I did watch it. Here's my thoughts. Let me know if you want to talk further.
Okay.
So that's probably the best first step.
All right. Yeah, I won't put the email on here. What is the website?
It's obscuredpictures.com.
Okay. Is it pictures or picture?
Pictures. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and you're welcome to put it up. I mean, I think there's only 12 people in here. It's just RJ at obscuredpictures.com. It's pretty simple. I'm not hard to find.
Well, the funny thing is, obscure. Nope, I got to put a D on there. Why obscured pictures?
There you go. It's a funny story. Actually, I was working with Joaquin Phoenix on this film, and he asked, like, what is this? What is this title? It doesn't sound like I would want my films to be at your company, but look, I I've always been fascinated and I've always been drawn to the films that nobody else cares about. You know, I grew up in Utah and I was going to Sundance when I was 15. And I think the first thing I saw there was a short film that was basically about a sort of guy and his awkward, not non-sexual, I will be very clear, his awkward relationship with his horse. And I just found it fascinating. And I thought, what kind of storyteller is this? And what are they trying to say? And all the, so I always liked the movies that nobody else was talking about. I was that guy. And so I always wanted to work on films that hadn't broken out and hadn't been seen by a ton of people, because no offense to anybody who's into them, but like, you could not drag my dead ass body to a Marvel movie. I don't give a shit. I will never watch them. It seems like, for me, it's a waste of time. But if you tell me that there's a weird Macedonian film about a sort of witch whose spirit gets passed from person to person, and it's made by an Australian director, and it's called You Won't Be Alone, I will watch that in a minute. And I did, and I worked on it. I love that movie. I've seen it now twice, which I never watch movies more than once. But those are the movies that I'm interested in working on, because they're the ones that actually say something to me. And so Obscured Pictures is this idea of like movies that nobody else has actually seen about yet. So our job is to take those movies that are sort of behind the veil and bring them out into public.
Okay. No, I love it. It's a unique name that sticks out, because again, yeah, it's not something that you would expect. So good on you for
and
that.
Everybody just calls us Obscured. I mean, so that's the short form.
So can you just walk me, let's do a case study of an independent film, and you can name it or not name it, that came to you that, you know, the filmmaker didn't really know what to do with. And, you know, how did you take it? And if you could share numbers, that'd be great in terms of, you know, what it was able to do, just to get an understanding of, you know, kind of more detailed understanding of how this works.
Yeah. Well, I think it's actually, let me see if I can get the numbers real quick, because it's a fascinating, especially for a number of independent producers and filmmakers who, apologies, I will have this for you in 1 second. So the film is called You Resemble Me. It's something that we just got brought into late, for sure. The filmmakers were self-releasing. The film debuted at Venice in 2021. And we wanted to basically, they came to us and said, oh, we don't know what's going to happen. We're going to self-distribute. I was like, great, all for it. And so they had already booked it into a number of theaters. And I asked them how they did it, because, you know, booking theaters is not an easy thing to do. But we got brought in like essentially 3 weeks before, which is not enough time,
Right.
before the theatrical run, which started off not last Friday, but the Friday before, which would have been the 4th in New York. And they had some pretty good filmmaker relationships. So they set up all these Q&As. And I'm just trying to pull up the numbers so I can share them with everybody. Me. And in New York, I think they had probably 5 different Q&As with different filmmakers. So Spike Lee was an advisor. They had got Spike Jonze met with the filmmaker, and he lended his name to something. Riz Ahmed really loved the film, and so he recommended something. And so last week, the film went into LA, and they did Q&As in LA. And let's see, the total cum at this point in time is $34,000, let's call it, between New York and LA. And it's only been in 1 theater in New York and now 1 theater in LA. But they sort of basically went full bore and did almost every single screening on a Friday or Saturday or Sunday night. They had a Q&A with the filmmaker. She traveled herself around, and then they did a conversation with some other filmmaker that they'd either worked with or had a relationship or made a cold call and just said, hey, look, would you support my movie? Would you do a Q&A with us? So people like Alma Harrell and others, it's great. But we kind of were able to cobble together a pretty decent publicity tour. I mean, she was just on Amanpour. What's today? Tuesday? She was on yesterday. So we worked out that booking, got a review in the New York Times, didn't get a review in the LA Times because right now LA Times is pretty challenged with reviewers. They don't have a lot that they can assign. And then there were other people who were just like, all right, well, we want to help. So they brought in a social media and influencer agency, but they were kind of amassing all this stuff collectively together. and then came and brought us on board at the last minute. So that's when we came on and just started pitching the shit out of this movie. And, if we had had more time, we would have absolutely gotten more. But there's 2 articles in Filmmaker Magazine. If people want to go to Filmmaker Magazine this month, there'll be a piece from Dina Mayer, the director, and a piece from Elizabeth Wood from Willow Productions. And she kind of did a piece on how they did the whole distribution. So those would be a good case studies to take a look at.
Okay, no, that's fascinating. We have another question for you. If you're working as a sales agent on a film, how do you like to approach the process with the filmmakers and the buyer?
So our sales, we do probably about 3 to 5 films sales-wise a year. It's not the primary core of the business. So it has to be something that we know that we can actually get to the right buyers for. I've had long-standing relationships with everybody for almost 3 decades at this point. So I know everybody, but if it's a film that's going to Sundance, Toronto, or Cannes, I don't take it on because that's so much of an agency game. You're just never going to break through. But if it's a film that's independent or is going to a smaller festival, absolutely. Happy to take it on. We just had this animated horror film called Canvas go up onto Gravitas, bought it eventually. And I helped get it into 2 film festivals last year, or 3, Lighthouse, Annecy, and there was one more. Can't think of it at the moment. And so after that point, we took it out to all the buyers and distributors to try and find a home that to get it onto VOD pretty quickly, because we knew theatrical was never an option for that film. No problem. You just kind of have to accept the reality of that and move forward. So I went out to a couple, had I think 3 offers eventually, but then Gravitas came to the table and they had kind of what we liked as a cool mix of advance fee that they were willing to pay, plus a really good split in terms of the fees. And there was something else that we wanted to kind of like hold off for the filmmakers, and they were willing to let us do that. So we ended up going with Gravitas, whereas another film, which was a documentary that we did called Being Thunder, which has just recently been released by Film Movement. It was a documentary about a 2-spirit dancer in a Narragansett tribe in, I think, Charente is based in Connecticut. I think so. And it was sort of about Charente's journey from understanding their 2-spiritedness, but also still wanting to compete in these sort of traditional tribal dances, and then getting moved over to the women's categories or the girls categories. And so that culture clash and everything that was going on there was very much a part of the story. And then it was also about Charente trying to get into a university setting and to go off to college. And so that was a film that, again, we looked at the film, we knew what the sort of targets were in terms of distributors, because as soon as you're doing a doc, a certain number of distributors out of the mix. As soon as you're doing a non-personality doc, it takes out another series of buyers. And so we kind of came up with a crafted list of about 15 to 20 buyers, and then just basically started drilling down and going one by one and hitting everybody up and getting them to watch it and trying to get an answer as quickly as possible. And then eventually Film Movement was the right home in the right place. And now the title is now out in theaters, and I think seemingly doing well, not quite sure, but all of this is a gamble. I mean, you basically, as you know, you kind of put everything onto the table, you bet the house, and then shit, well, let's hope that it works. And the people show up and pay money so you can actually get some of that money back. But there's no way to prepare for potential fallout and everything to just go to shit. And that happens with the best of us, and that happens with filmmakers that have made 5 movies, and then all of a sudden one just doesn't work for whatever reason. And there's really no mathematics to it. It's why nobody teaches this in film school, because there is nothing to be taught other than some sort of general parameters. I mean, I have a degree in film theory and criticism, which is totally worthless. But I've always loved movies. So, and I had a hand in marketing before that. And so that mix of the two just sort of came together. And then I got a job at Sundance, and that's how this all came to be.
Yeah, there's definitely no formula to it, because every film is unique, every filmmaker is unique, and I think for this group, and I'm assuming, so forgive me if I'm wrong, most of our films aren't going to get onto Sundance or to Tribeca or into Berlin or places like that, and just trying to figure out how to navigate that world. That's why I went to AFM this year. I'm like, okay, let me meet these things and let me see. And I was actually shocked You know, I was afraid to go in and talk to people. And mind you, I talk to people for a living. I'm a college professor. So it's not like I'm not comfortable speaking to people, but it was
Yep.
a little nerve-wracking where I found myself like nervous, you know, going in to talk to them. But as soon as I talked to the first few people, you know, everyone over there is pretty open, and you know, they need product. And I think that's one of the big things that I think a lot of filmmakers don't realize now is every day it seems like there's new options coming out for you, new outlets for your films to go out to. You know, how do you stay on top of that? Because, you know, there's so many streamers that I'm not even aware of that were out there.
Yeah, I mean, it this industry, it's musical chairs though. I mean, I'm working with the same press people that I did the very first year I worked for Sundance. I'm still talking to the same producers that I did when I was a location scout in Utah. I mean, it just is a shift. And so once you can kind of like get yourself in, and sometimes that's a cheat, sometimes it's a just a lot of shaking hands and going to every event and introducing yourself to people as much as possible. That after that, it gets a lot easier. I mean, making movies is still hard, and getting the money to make movies is still hard, and making money off of making movies is still hard.
Mhm.
But once you start to know some of the players, then it's a lot easier to meet other players. And once you have your first movie, it's a lot easier to get your second one going. And so just know that, look, uh, I work on probably, I think we do at this point like 50 to 60 movies a year. And some of them are first time filmmakers, and those are my favorite experiences for the most part. It's just, it's never going to be straightforward. It's always pivoting. I mean, I just found out that one of the films that we had built an entire release campaign around going to Sundance just didn't get into Sundance. And so now we're like, shit, well, we're going to have to come up with a whole new plan for that movie. And how you message that to filmmakers, and how you message that to cast, and how you then find a new date that doesn't have 45 other movies on it. It's all a challenge. Everything is a headache. Um, you know, you can't be in this business unless you're willing to like deal with a lot of garbage, because it's just exhausting. I mean, even the filmmaking side of it is just, okay, well, this export didn't work, and so now we don't have sound on this scene, or there are no subtitles showed up on this scene that's in French. I mean, all those sort of things. That doesn't stop when you're done making the movie. You then just pass it off onto us, and then we have all the other kind of garbage to deal with. Of like, well, great. So the New York Times isn't going to review because they have a reviewer on holiday that week, and there's 25 other movies that got in before us. I mean, that kind of stuff happens all the time.
Yeah.
And so it's then trying to pivot and figure out like, okay, well, what can we do? That's one of the three questions that I always ask filmmakers, like, what do you want to do? That's question number one. What can we do? Question number two. And question number three, which gets asked a lot less, but is what should we do? Because sometimes releasing in theaters, you shouldn't do, because you're going to lose money. It's going to dilute your audience. Should you be at Sundance in a smaller section, or take a sort of gala slot in Berlin? I'd probably take the gala slot in Berlin. If you have an international film, and you have a film that has more traction, is going to have wider sales possibilities internationally than in the US, go to Berlin. Sundance is a US market. If you have an international film in Sundance, good luck getting anybody to care about it.
Yeah.
So it's conversations like that that are really key to building strategy to being successful.
Okay. Well, RJ, thank you for taking the time. I think 12:50 is our cutoff here. It's 12:49. I know I was enlightened. I'm hoping our attendees were enlightened, and really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us.
Of course. Good to see
All right.
everybody. I'll not see everybody this time, but talk later. Bye.
All right. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
Ciao.